Ontario Premier Doug Ford there saying all premiers agree, as he puts it, that Canada should negotiate a separate trade deal with Mexico. Ford, of course, pointed to criticism that Mexico has become a backdoor of sorts for China to circumvent tariffs from the U.S. and Canada. And the feds here have voiced the same concerns. Meanwhile, reaction does continue to pour in over Donald Trump's pick for Commerce Secretary, billionaire CEO Howard Lutnick. Here's a listen to Trade Minister Mary Ng talking about just that.
I think that Mr. Lutnick will have a look at this Canada-U.S. relationship, the envy of the world, and you know, I don't want to prejudge anything, but what I would say is I'm really looking forward to working with the person who is going to head up commerce.
Trade with the U.S., of course, will be a major focus for Canada once Donald Trump takes office. The former president has threatened a 10% tariff on all imports, and Canada has so far not yet received any assurances that it will, or our exports to the United States will be exempted. I spoke to former Bank of Canada governor and current special advisor at Osler, Hoskin and Harcourt, Stephen Poloz, about the potential economic impact on Canada. But first, as a former Bank of Canada governor, I wanted to find out from him how the million Canadians who are set to renew their mortgages next year will find lowering interest rates and more to the point, a lower key lending rate than they would have found 6 months ago.
Well, mechanically, it's bound to be less than what people maybe thought 6 months ago because things have moved. But it's still non-trivial because you're talking about the people who have to have the most increase. They're the ones that got mortgages during the really, really low interest rates. And just moving to normal interest rates, say 3-ish% for the central bank rate, around there, means you're going maybe from 2% mortgage to 5 or close to 5, per se. That's a pretty big climb for a big mortgage. And so people seem to be anticipating that. The savings rate has gone up. I think people are kind of provisioning. They're getting ready for that. But you bear in mind that, you know, household spending per household has been shrinking now for almost 2 years. That effect is going to linger. It may get less, but it'll continue to be a downdraft on the spending for, say, about a third of Canadian households. The other 2/3 are, you know, in better shape because they're not renewing a mortgage. But, you know, ask Canadian Tire. There's a recession out there. It's not measured as one because of the immigration effect. So, but that means that the downward pressure on inflation is built into the system now, and it will last another year or so. And so that's what has to be countered through the rest of the dynamics of this process.
And how is that countered?
Well, it's countered by interest rates falling, and that'll get a bit of a turn up for first-time home buyers, especially those who have sat out this period. The folks who renew will still have a big increase in mortgage payments. You know, in today's CPI, the mortgage interest component is still contributing 0.8 percentage points of the 2%. And we know mortgage rates are all lower than they were, but there's a lagged effect on that. And so that will fall to zero. So we know inflation is going to fall mechanically from 2 to below 2 because of that effect alone over the next, say, 6 months. It was 2 points that it was contributing just a year ago. So it's come down to 0.8 and it'll go down to 0.
The other thing besides interest rates, and part and parcel of them that people I think are really talking about right now, is the Canadian dollar.
Yes.
And I wondered if you could, in your view, explain the relationship between our interest rate, our key lending rate relative to the U.S. and how that's informing the dollar, and where you think the dollar is headed in regard to that.
That's a complicated question.
It is, yeah, my apologies. Yeah.
But yes, there's no question there is a divergence between the Canada and U.S. economies, primarily because the U.S. household sector doesn't go through that renewal thing that we've just talked about. So that really opens up that gap, and the dynamic suggests we got another, as I said, another 6 or 9 months of that. And so interest rates are falling more in Canada and faster in Canada, and that always puts downward pressure on the currency. At the same time, we have the Trump renaissance kind of has boosted the U.S. dollar against all currencies. So we get that combination happening at this stage. And it's very complicated to predict on where, but normally, you know, 100 basis points on interest rates, widening the spread would give you around 2% on the currency. That's not unlike what we've seen in the last, say, 8 weeks. You know, if there's more to happen, then it may be a little more. my concern maybe on the dollar is a more fundamental one, which is that because of our weak productivity growth, much weaker, in fact, negative productivity growth, our unit labor costs are rising quite a bit faster than U.S. unit labor costs. This is an important benchmark to the purchasing power parity of our currency. And that fundamental, that base is eroding. And so it could be that we're heading for a lower level that's just the long-term level. That might be sort of a 3% depreciation, for example. I'm not forecasting this, but to describe that there's more downside risk because of that past performance. So a catalyst could push it there fast, potentially. That would be another couple of cents, let's say. High 60s, that's possible. But again, you can't forecast these things. What you should do as a business is kind of prepare for that as a possibility and know exactly what you'll do if it happens, or take out some insurance against it.
You mentioned the former president. My final question to you is about the prospect of, in particular, what he has pledged to do during the campaign, which is apply a 10% tariff across the board. In your view, what kind of an impact would that have on Canada's economy?
Yeah, well, we rely very much on trade. So anything which distorts or disrupts trade is going to cost us. We know that. The whole world depends on trade, so the whole world is going to be disrupted if that's what actually occurs. It's fundamentally a stagflationary disturbance that they would create. And the analysis is vastly complicated by the possibility that countries may react in similar ways. This would, of course, double down on the stagflationary element, because you'd be actively raising prices in your own country in order to, with tariffs in retaliation. And of course, we know that disrupting trade in that way is only going to slow things down. The biggest countries, such as U.S., can look okay on that, but it's the smaller countries like ourselves that would be mostly negative. What I'm hoping, of course, is that we have so much in common, so much integrated trade. You know, for example, 30% of our exports are oil. Is that likely to attract a tariff? Like, energy security matters still just as much to the United States as ever. It seems like an odd thing to do. And so on from there. Steel, aluminum, there's a lot, lumber, pulp and paper. All these things are highly integrated businesses, autos. Are you really going to do this? So when you get down to the actual brass tacks of it, I'm hoping that corporate America, along with corporate Canada, can say, here's how this will work. And that then there's a deal to be had, but we know which side our bread is buttered on. We have to protect that trade relationship no matter what.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Mr. Poloz, appreciate the analysis as always. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thanks.